Greetings. We are a group of 3 art students that will be tackling an art piece through the perspectives taught to us in the second module of our art appreciation class. We will be discussing the artist and creating a wider discussion in the context of 3 paradigms in viewing art. We will be looking today at Plato's concept of mimesis, Walter Benjamin's analysis of art in the age of reproduction, and finally the distinction, or perhaps lack thereof, between art and reality from 2 opposing writers on the spectrum of the purpose of art, Baudrillard and Oscar Wilde. Today we will be discussing a piece by Elmgreen and Dragset called Mercury with Socks. To briefly summarize the history of this piece, it is a digital rendering of a sculpture by one of Denmark's national artists from the 19th century, Bertel Thorvaldsen. Thorvaldsen's sculpture strictly adhered to the classical Greek and Roman styles, which emphasized the beauty of the human form. This strict adherence often alienated people from his works, as the perceived aura of these classical styles during his time of making them were far removed from the people. Now back to Elmgreen and Dragset. So Elmgreen and Dragset were an artistic duo and LGBT couple that are famous for their wit and subversive social commentary in their pieces. They cover issues ranging from statements about the LGBT rights all the way to the gentrification of nature because of consumerism. This specific piece was created in 2009 on laser print as a display poster in the Thorvaldsen Museum as an edit of the sculpture Mercury About to Kill Argus, a reference to the murder of Argus Panoptes, the champion of Hera, as ordered by Zeus in the pursuit of one of his many famous affairs. This piece is one of 3 pieces of Greek classical statues wearing athletic gear that Elmgreen and Dragset edited for the display. Chapter 1: Mimesis. In this chapter, we will be discussing how Plato would have perceived this art piece by briefly summarizing Plato's views on art through the concept of mimesis and his opinions of art as a whole. In this chapter, you will learn why Plato would have thought of this piece and its creation process as dangerous and even corruptive of the human mind's perception of the real world.
Art, according to Plato, was a mimicry, a way by which people imitated their perception of an idea that was the supreme reality. It would never be able to really showcase what was happening in that point in time, but rather to simply showcase a portion of what was there. It only presents the likeness of something in concrete and is there only for representation. Although there are numerous ways by which this concept can be problematic, especially given that nowadays, art has developed different forms by which it no longer seeks to stimulate reality. One of the first purposes by which art was created for was in fact for the sake of being able to preserve points in time, certain events, people, or at least represent them in a way or form by which they can be continuously observed. That is one of the reasons why the Greeks had a lot of ways by which they explored it. The Greeks were oftentimes very fond of trying to relate their mythologies to reality, in a way of presenting an idea of how important figures could be like, such as Greek gods being built with certain forms and certain physical attributes which were attractive to them in a particular point in time. This then further removing the concept of art being in line with reality. As Plato had described art, he focused on how art is something that merely copied or imitated an idea that came from reality, therefore making it twice removed and irrelevant, however even more powerful, given that it can be whatever the painter would want it to be, which is why Plato emphasizes that it should be controlled. Taking this into account, the artwork alone, even disregarding the addition of socks by artists Elmgreen and Dragset, would have been enough to showcase Plato's conception of art being far removed from reality, as it showcased the physique and persona of Mercury as having well-defined features that most of humanity doesn't really have. Given this, art can then be seen to provide misconceptions, as the painters are mere imitators and can tweak the piece of art into what they would want people to see them as. The imitator only lightly touches on a small part of the truth, and in this case, it's not even based on an actual reality. This then further solidified as he emphasizes the difference of what one setting or icon is actually like and how they may appear like. Plato thoroughly emphasized how this imitation can bring forth a lot of dangers, as there would really be no limit to how one can present ideas and how they make pieces of art. To bring this point forward, the original sculpture Elmgreen and Dragset edited weren't even made by the Greeks. They were an imitation one layer further than the same art that Plato criticized in the Republic. According to him, art is powerful and therefore dangerous. Given this, he puts emphasis on the necessity of controlling this, as how it is shown is far from the truth of it all. This then also being applicable to his ideology of the warring superiority of philosophy to poetry, as philosophy deals with ideas, as poetry deals with illusions, and does not provide any type of intellectual premises by which reality could be improved with. Furthermore, aside from the mere statue showcasing Plato's point, it is further drawn back as artists Elmgreen and Dragset added athletic socks to the statue as if to recreate the Greek sexual fascination with the male form in the modern day, bringing it perhaps one layer closer to reality, but ultimately back at the same square of immorality Plato drew out initially. If anything, the edit made by artists Elmgreen and Dragset provided exactly what Plato had thought of, being that art feeds off from the illusions by which its makers would want it to be perceived as, and even then the meaning is still open for numerous interpretations and imitations so as to create more illusions, pulling it further and further from the truth. Although Plato gave importance to the truth and supreme reality, and his ideology of what art is somewhat too academic, the claims by which he points out that art's main purpose was to provide aesthetic delight or expression is actually true. However, to believe that art still only caters to these purposes would be to overlook the power by which these illusions have also contributed to people's perception of reality and their ability to express these perceptions.
Chapter 2: Art and Reproduction. In this chapter, we will discuss how the consumption of art as media affects this painting and how Walter Benjamin would have perceived this piece of art given his critique of the methods of reproduction and production of art that have been made possible by new technologies. Though Benjamin was really into films, we think he may be into photo editing and the creation of Mercury wood socks, as well as for similar reasons if he were alive to see this piece today. In today's modern society that heavily consumes media, there is no surprise that art has also found its way within the realm of the digital world. Such presence in the digital world is mostly associated with the reproduction of artworks. Walter Benjamin discusses his ideas and perspectives on the reproduction of artworks through his article entitled "The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction." Benjamin also discusses the history of art reproduction, which seems to have dated back to the Greeks. Photography, which was foreshadowed by lithography, is arguably one of the more common ways art is reproduced for mass consumption in today's society. Photography has also in a sense contributed to one's discovery and familiarity of several of the most famous artists through the use of social media and the likes. With these ideas of reproduction of art, Walter Benjamin has also been known to idealize art as having an aura. The aura of the original artwork has been asserted that it is indeed a vital aspect of the original artwork. However, this aura somehow diminishes as art is reproduced by means of photography, replication, film, and the likes. Benjamin also believes that the authority of the artist perishes as his work of art continues to be reproduced for mass media consumption. Benjamin mentions the concept of Dadaism as a form of reproducing art. Dadaism essentially aims to stir up controversy and to outrage the public by inserting unconventional attributes to what the public already sees as works of art. He mentions that Dadaists have the tendency to sacrifice their monetary value for their artwork for contemplative immersion. This implies that the Dadaist works tend to provoke a more genuine form of meaning that the Dadaist intended to do so through his work. Elmgreen and Dragset's Mercury with Socks is indeed an excellent representation of Benjamin's ideas on the reproduction of art. It is essentially a photograph or a digital reproduction of Thorvaldsen's Mercury sculpture, albeit with the addition of socks by means of technology. This artwork undeniably does not give up the same vibe or aura that even a photograph of the original artwork of the Roman god wood. The unconventional addition of socks somehow evoke a modern vibe, though Thorvaldsen's was also a modern sculpture of the Roman god. This reproduction that Elmgreen and Dragset has done to the original sculpture seemed to have created its own unique conventions and aura to the god Mercury. Dadaism also seemed to have been employed through this digital artwork. For instance, the unconventional crossover between what seems to be modern sports socks with a classical sculpture of the god paves the way for a much broader discourse on the author's intentions. It is necessary to realize that this artwork is indeed a product of a reproduction that seeks to cater to the masses of people who do not have access specifically to Thorvaldsen's original Mercury sculpture. In relation to Benjamin's description of the Dadaist, Elmgreen and Dragset have truly gone beyond the conventions of modern art that somehow revolve around expressions of pop culture, political, social, or economic issues prevalent in society. It can be implied that Elmgreen and Dragset decided to refine the expressionism of modern artwork conventions with the mere addition of socks. Not to mention as well, Elmgreen and Dragset's Mercury with socks has indeed sparked several controversies of its manner of reproducing the Roman god. This means that this digital artwork has indeed served its Dadaist approach to instill meaning, and in this case, vulnerability, even if it means to enrage the public and sacrificing monetary sales value. This indeed is a fascist approach to reproducing art, where the art makes itself available to the public, even to the proletariat, with the ease of society's access and connectivity to the digital world. In addition, Benjamin states that the reproduction of art also aims to stabilize the social structure by allowing the proletariat and the masses specifically to seek emotional benefit from the art opposed to the material benefits. Moreover, this sense of fascism could lead to war as the masses become so emotionally empowered by the expressions of these artworks. War is also perceived as beautiful through Benjamin's lenses, as he believes that it paves the way for progression and technology and ideology in particular. As a matter of fact, Elmgreen and Dragset's Mercury with socks could serve as a symbol for the struggle between traditional values as opposed to those of the LGBT. The unconventional aspects of the digital artwork somehow reminisce Benjamin's ideology on art's beauty. The struggles between ideology could indeed reflect that of war, which in turn could instill change in society's views, one that art strives for.
Chapter 3: Art and Reality. In this chapter, we will be exploring the relationship of art and reality through two writers who have discussed views on the relationship between these two concepts. Does art supersede reality? Does it form it somehow? And is this a good thing? In this chapter, we will discuss Oscar Wilde's claim that reality imitates art, and Baudrillard's claims of simulacra and simulation, and how this interacts with society at large. First, we shall discuss Wilde, and how he would have reacted to seeing this piece by Elmgreen and Dragset. Oscar Wilde would definitely jive well with the purpose, meaning, and inspiration behind Mercury with socks. As a man deeply enamored with realities beyond the perfection nature can provide, Oscar Wilde was inevitably drawn by Romanesque art that was inspired by the grandeur and larger-than-life lifestyles of the Roman pantheon. Featured in this piece is one of these gods, Mercury, the Roman god in charge of the boundary between the upper and lower world. No other character in the mythical pantheon could quite summarize Oscar Wilde's life as fittingly as Mercury would. Wilde's philosophy that life imitates art, or in more pedagogical terms, that art and the philosophies within art teach us how to interact with the given society that we live in, makes it rational that he would prefer the most fantastical versions of art, as that would prompt the most fantastical versions of life to be born out of it. Wilde was definitely onto something. Oscar Wilde was a man that somewhat despised the real world, as he found so much solace in the beautiful lies that he could experience elsewhere, particularly within fantastical art pieces featuring the expressions of carnal desire, sensuality, and awe. He hated all things that the real world represented. and despised all art that focused on politics, the poor, anything reminiscent of how much the real world sucks. Perhaps due to his belief that if art were to concentrate on these things, their negative powers may be magnified and society may be led deeper into these negative things. In fairness to him, the entire world's fascination with racism, reality TV, and misogyny did lead to a trend of strongman presidents in recent times. So perhaps life imitates art may not be so far from the truth. I mean, for an era addicted to reality TV to basically allow the most powerful man in the world to be a reality TV star, now that shows me Wilde might have been onto something, really. So anyways, back to the statue. So this statue of Mercury is both a fantastical representation of human imagination, as well as a picture of a somewhat taboo pleasure rolled into one painting. This piece took an already beautiful sculpture of a perfect man and enhanced its carnal appeal in the modern era by adding elements from the homoerotic community. The biking socks on a naked man are a piece of homoerotic fetish that is connected to the larger fetish of athletic gear in men. So all the elements of the painting just have this element of grandeur and focus on the erotic and fantastical things that Wilde would have lived for. More than that, the technology used to achieve this piece, photo editing software, these things make it possible for shapes and vision perceivable and perfectly reproducible bits that always keep the form of the piece perfect to exist. These are things that the piece represent, as well due to the piece being inseparable from the technology used to create them. So technology offering artists a way to completely separate creation from the natural world is basically the ad absurdum of Oscar Wilde's perspective and arguments of what he would have wanted. In effect, we believe that he would be over the moon with the concept of being able to claim nature's beauty away from it altogether through photo editing software. Cut out the middleman, we imagine him saying, as both the savvy businessman he was in life and the shameless procurer of visual pleasures. He would be like, yeah, I'm all for that. Looking at this piece, I could only imagine how Oscar Wilde would look at it today. I imagine he would be quite happy looking at a piece inspired by the Roman fascination with the perfection of the youthful male form. After all, he was quite into classical art during his lifetime. He would probably take a few minutes, though, to ponder how peculiar and eccentric the act of putting clothes on a marble statue may be, even taking a moment to try and figure out how the socks got there in the first place. If Oscar Wilde had never died and lived to see the image in context, however, he may make a snide remark on how the LGBT movement that inspires this painting has become politicized, such that it would not be super fun for him seeing art featuring a provocative male form without thinking of the political violence that is currently inseparable from pieces of this nature. Though, on the other hand, he may appreciate the fact that a generation growing up on national art featuring LGBT sexuality as beautiful in state-supported cultural art may invoke feelings of gladness that his previously most taboo of pleasures had been legitimized by the state. He may hearken to the appropriateness of using the statue of Mercury as a symbol of forbidden love, as this captured in its form the eroticism of the Olympians in both its form and the fact that the statue is basically featuring the murder of the gatekeeper of forbidden love, Argus Panoptes. Wilde seems to not care for anything but the piece, rather than what its creator intended it for. So it's quite difficult to know the extent of the truth or real world Oscar Wilde would ignore, given that he was so savvy in manipulating the real world for personal gain, if only for the purpose of extending his experience of pleasure within the plane of lying. Would Oscar Wilde's perspective on the love of lies over truth allow him to ignore the truths of the world around him that the sculpture features? Or would his enjoyment of the new paradigms of lies created by digital reproduction and the legitimacy of culture in the pursuit of all forms of pleasure and lies offset this? It is quite ambiguous given the nature of Wilde in achieving whatever he wanted, whether it be pleasure, success, or the fulfillment of his physical desires. Though, I imagine he would be quite happy with this painting and the progression of society in pursuit of pleasure. Baudrillard, on the other hand, poses quite a bleaker perspective on the whole thing. Baudrillard's piece on simulacra and simulation says that art and media create simulacra, imitations of real objects that create a simulation, an artificial experience at least one layer removed from the real world. This web of simulacra and simulations humanity has accrued has removed us several layers away from the base reality world, or the real world, such that Baudrillard claims that there may no longer be a base reality, or at least there is not a base reality that we can claim with absolute certainty anymore. I myself would not be confident in my ability to perceive these things as they really are. I mean, I was born into a simulation of culture and I can expect to die in a simulation of culture. Basically, his perspective is like an edgy, bleak version of Wilde's perspective. If art imitates life, then nothing is actually life. Basically is what Baudrillard would say in this situation. With the development of the same bits and computer bytes that made this art piece, people have been able to create simulacra and simulations at breakneck speed compared to before. If Baudrillard thought TV media was bad, just wait until he gets a load of the Photoshop software that literally puts images of objects and outputs simulacra at the fingertips of every single individual that could pay $10 a month for a Photoshop license. I can only imagine how mind-blowing the concept would be to someone like Baudrillard, who put so much importance and time on studying what he saw to be a saturating force in modern life at his own time of TV media. This piece to him would basically be an example of a 3-layer deep simulacra created as an interaction of several simulations. The first layer would be the Roman mythology, which in itself is a web of simulations that come from the Greek pantheons, which in itself is a collection of the thousands of Mycenaean simulations about the mythological world before it. The second layer is that of the artist who was inspired by the Enlightenment thinking, another set of simulations, to create marble statues of Roman gods in Copenhagen, of all places, in the 19th century. The third layer I have identified is the one presented to us in the form of Mercury with socks. Just some of the many simulations this piece includes the interactions between the world and the LGBT community. Among LGBT fetishists who have placed carnal value on particular images, and the Copenhagen art community who seem to have mixed feelings about their national artist's work being appropriated and remixed into a piece of this nature. Baudrillard, looking at this painting, would likely be somewhat horrified at how out of hand his predictions of the increase in the acceleration of the creation of simulacra and simulations have gotten since he passed. How many simulated realities a single picture made in Photoshop could possess, and the sheer force that 1 billion people with the ability to create a shared simulacra would mean for the world.
As a group who have spent the better part of the semester gleaning insights from these thinkers, we have been able to reflect on ours on what would otherwise be a very simple imagery to us of a Roman god wearing socks. Because of the influence of these thinkers on the way we see art, we seem to like the painting more because of the many ways we had learned to appreciate it. One thing that we largely appreciate after going through this exercise of talking about the painting is the difficulty of separating ourselves from the art critics that we really didn't understand before the course. We were quite torn at our appreciation of the painting due to the amount of education we had received to understand the complexities of why art is good or not. At the risk of sounding like a pretentious art critic, we like the painting because of the deep complexities that are associated with a deeper look at the piece. But we also just think it is pretty cool and funny seeing the work of a national artist with socks on it. At the shallowest level, it kind of reminds us of a SpongeBob episode where Squidward put a molding of his nose on a marble statue of Adonis just to make it look better to him, which could be what Elmgreen and Dragset were actually going for, given their penchant for being funny and satirical at times. On the other hand, because of multiple ways we have learned to see this painting, we also appreciate it for deep art reasons now. Knowing the possibility that the egg is on our face for having done so much analysis on what may be such a simple concept may be our group's mark of pride as an artist. For all we know, this is our induction into the masochistic art community.